Today's session is about quality improvement and specifically the sequence to achieve change. And we've had sessions about quality improvement in the past, and we'll probably have more in the future because it's a really important topic. And many of you are very skilled at QI yourselves, and hopefully these sessions provide you with some extra tools as you're out there championing PMH and QI in your clinics and PCNs and maybe even beyond. So today's guest presenters, Tina Nicholson, is a family doctor who does a lot of things, as we saw, but today she's joining us in her role with the Physician Learning Program. And Erin Hannay is a quality improvement facilitator with Edmonton O'Damon PCN. And well, we welcome her as well. So if you attended the recent PCN strategic forum, you may have had the pleasure of sitting in on a breakout session on QI that Tina and Erin were part of, and we're really happy to have them join us today. All right, so as we all know, our North Star in Alberta primary care is the patient's medical home approach, with the goal that every patient will be connected to a medical home for longitudinal care. And over the last several years, and for many more to come, we'll be working toward making the transition from the traditional family practice, which worked really well in the past, but with all of the changes and increasing complexity in our world, we needed a different approach. And our implementation elements to achieve PMH, you can see the first one is engaged leadership, which includes champions like yourselves who take those first steps, share your experiences, and support others to make the transition. But the next step here is capacity for improvement. And while this refers to the clinic team's readiness and ability to make positive changes, it also refers to having a system for making those changes in a structured way. So there are always changes that a clinic can make to adapt or improve their processes. And applying a structured approach to making those changes can make it so much easier. So the science of quality improvement provides that structure that we need, and it helps teams to be efficient and effective in their process improvement work. So we've had a few sessions related to QI because it really is important, but it's not always easy without some tools and support. But one of the biggest challenges is that working in a clinic can feel like being caught in a whirlwind, and adding quality improvement projects to the mix can feel like an impossible notion. But taking an occasional step back, stepping out of that whirlwind to examine how things are being done and what changes could be made to increase efficiency or to support that team approach to care, or whatever is the pebble in your shoe, can actually start to decrease that whirlwind feeling. So even though it feels like a lot of work, it actually results in less feeling of that out of control feeling in the future. All right. So one of the most important things to know, though, is that quality improvement is not meant to be done in isolation by the physician or the NP. Most clinics doing this work have a QI team. And for many, they also have access to a practice facilitator through their PCN. And through their PCN, they may also be able to access panel managers and other supports. And then, of course, there are groups like ACT, HQCA, ACFP, PLP, and so many others who support this work with clinics. So this is the sequence to achieve change, and it's one tool that can help guide the work. There are 10 steps, and we'll go through them all. The first is to form an improvement team. So especially in large clinics, it's not necessary for the whole clinic to work on QI projects. A QI team with representation from each role in the clinic is most efficient. And generally speaking, teams of about 10 or less work really well. People can move on and off the QI team so that no one gets overloaded. And of course, for clinics who have access to a practice facilitator, the QI team gets a great deal of support and guidance when they have a PF to work with. And speaking of which, Erin, I'll get you to come off mute here.
Hello.
What comments would you add for us about the importance of forming a QI team?
I think the number one thing that I've noticed in working with clinics is that it's really challenging to form a QI team because it feels like it's, you've mentioned a lot of things. We've got all these other things going on in the whirlwind, and now this is extra time that we have to carve out and everyone's exhausted. So just keeping in mind that forming a team doesn't have to look very formal or structured. It can be a quick huddle. It can be a message board on whatever you're using internally. It can be a binder where you're leaving notes and Post-its, with just quick meetings. But as long as you've got that representation, as you mentioned, so you know that whatever you're tackling, you've got all your subject matter experts, all the invested leaders that are appropriate, so that when you make your change, you can sustain it. But yeah, just try not to make it so structured. I think just fit it in however you can, make sense for your group and your clinic.
Yeah, very wise words. It's true. Sometimes we get caught up in doing things the way we think they should be done, but really, as long as they get done, that's the important thing. Yeah, great. Thanks, Erin. All right, so the second step in the sequence to achieve change is to clarify the problem, or on the positive flip side, the opportunity, and create a statement around that. So it's important to really understand what the problem is and make sure that everybody's on the same page about what that problem is and why it deserves a team's valuable time and attention. To come up with a statement, it can be helpful to have the group discuss questions like, what is the problem we're talking about? Who does it affect? When exactly is it a problem? How does it specifically affect patients? And basically, why should we care about this? And then from there, you can come up with a sentence or two that clearly describe the problem to be fixed or the opportunity to be taken. And one tip, whenever possible, use data and evidence to support and understand the problem. Sources like the EMR are great. And of course, our HQCA panel reports are hugely helpful in this area. And Tina, I'll ask you to come off mute and talk a little bit about this.
Yeah, I think this piece is fundamental to the success of whatever project you decide to choose. I think one of the most important things is it has to be relevant, and it has to be within the locus of control of the physician group and clinic that are looking at it. If it's not within your control, you're not going to get very far with it. You're just going to get frustrated. And at the PLP, we've chosen to choose opportunity as the word, as opposed to problem. But it can be a problem. It can be an operational issue that's kind of annoying you or keeping you awake at night. And just remember that it could come from attending a CME or a new clinical practice guideline that makes you start to think, oh, I need to take a look at, what I've got in place already. For key example right now is our screening for breast cancer, and the fact that the age range has changed. So our reminders that we might have spent some QI work to set up are now out of date.
Great. Yeah, that's great. And you were talking about, Tina, we really encourage clinics to adopt a culture of continuous quality improvement. So, there are always things that we can improve or tweak. So yeah, great. Thank you. All right. The third step in the sequence to achieve change is to map the process. This is one of my favorite steps personally. And this is a lot. I don't expect you to read this whole thing, but it's just an example of a process map that a clinic team did to outline their preventive screening during physicals. And so this is how they did things before any QI work related to it was done. And it's really important to capture this before process, the current process. And it's always fascinating to do these maps with teams, because inevitably they discover things like here, duplication. So there are bottlenecks in the process, duplications, things that they didn't even realize were going on until you get a group together to map the process and see exactly what everyone is doing. And you can see here that the MOA and the physician were both checking blood pressure, but charting it in different places in the EMR. So they really actually weren't aware that they were doing it twice, and patients were probably thinking, oh, bonus. They're very thorough here, and no one actually said anything to anybody. So the QI team then, once they've mapped the current process, they can start to identify steps in the process that could maybe be done differently to make them more efficient or effective. And Erin, do you enjoy doing process maps as much as I do?
I sure do. And I promise to limit my love of process maps to maybe a more focused session. But the one thing I do want to mention is this is really an area that you can lean on a PF at your PCN. Even if you're not going to have them involved in the whole project or the ongoing things, this is something where they could drop in temporarily and just help you identify what that current state is. And you'll notice if you're checking ahead on the sequence, we do the current state mapping before we set an aim statement, because we really want to look at what are we actually doing right now. And we've checked with all of the people that might interact within this system or this process. And we do that first so that we make sure we're not tainting any of our solutioning, or we're not, fitting things in to match. We really want to know what's happening right now. And as you said, then when we start circling and starring and, oh no, it can really help focus that aim statement and focus in the scope of what that project is. Maybe you don't need to look at the whole process. You just need to look at these 3 steps first.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, and the other thing that I really like about process maps is as you make those changes, you can update that map. So take that current process and start changing it. And then you've got a beautiful tested and implemented changes recorded, and the clinic can then have that version of the process map saved electronically or in a hard copy for future reference. And really, this is great when you're orienting a new team member. You've got your processes beautifully laid out, and it's not reliant on, a person's recollection teaching to another person, because that's how sometimes little things get omitted, and then they get transferred down to every new person who's trained. So it's a great way to have some consistency in your processes. All right. The next 4 steps in the sequence actually represent the model for improvement. And back in June, Janet Craig and Angel Heinzman did a webinar that focused on these 4 steps. So I'm just going to touch on them very briefly so that you can see how they're part of the sequence. And then I'll check in with Erin and Tina when we get to the end of the 4 of them. So the model for improvement is a framework for developing, testing, and implementing changes leading to improvement. It's based in scientific method, and it's composed of 4 parts. So what are we trying to accomplish? The aim. How will we know that that change is an improvement? The measurement. What changes can we make that will result in improvement? And then these changes are tested in plan, do, study, act cycles, or what we call PDSAs. And when a team can answer those 3 questions, they can devise an aim statement and then try to keep that visible. And it can really help the QI team to stay focused and on track. So a very simple statement that sums up those 3 questions. And next in the model is identifying those measures. Now, again, in our last session, we talked about measurement for QI. And some of the key takeaways from that session were to get baseline measurements before you start doing any changes, get those baselines, and then gather just enough data to guide the work, not the rigor of measurement for research, just enough to give you what you need to know if it's working or not working. And then also it's helpful to display the data on a run chart that's visible to the team and maybe even visible to patients so that they can see the work the clinic is doing to make care better for them. And then next, the team decides what changes to test. We tend to call them potentially better practices. And I know we're used to hearing about things as best practices, things that the evidence tells us are the way to do things. We like to say potentially better practices because there are definitely sort of accepted ways to do things, but every clinic is different. Every clinic has a unique context. And so potentially it will work in the clinic. Potentially it will be better. Maybe it won't. Maybe a slightly different adaptation of that process will work in your clinic. So that's why we call them PBPs, or potentially better practices. And the ideas for changes to test can come from a variety of sources. Sometimes it is evidence from research. Sometimes it's ideas from your clinic team. The people who are actually doing the work often have the best ideas for how to change the work. And sometimes it's from the experience of others. So other clinics, other PCNs may have some ideas that you might want to test. And then when the changes to be tested have been determined, they're tested using those PDSA cycles in that approach. And this is probably one of the most important and useful aspects of the model for improvement. In fact, sometimes you hear people talk about PDSA in isolation of the model for improvement. So it seems to have a life of its own. And PDSAs are meant to start small and grow quickly. So we call them rapid tests of change. So you can have several of them going at once because they're really not that cumbersome or long and detailed. They're very quick. So when you start your PDSAs, your tests will be based on change ideas that are usually hunches or theories, maybe some early ideas of what you think will be a better way to do things. And then as you gain knowledge with your successive tests, you'll be able to move closer to determining which changes actually result in improvement before you spread them wider in the clinic. All right, so that brings us to the end of, I'm actually gonna go back here to the model for improvement. So I'll start with Tina. What thoughts do you have to share with us? Oh, you're just on mute.
Gosh, I should be better at that by now, shouldn't I? I was just looking at the chat and seeing that Bill had put in, it's not so much a formal structure as a structured approach. And I think that's what any of these gives, is that, you know, this is not the only way to do QI, but it's a lovely stepwise approach that covers the fundamentals without, you know, needing to have that deeper dive into the science behind it. The science is proven. I think having a physician to be engaged and help lead the process within a clinic setting is always going to be helpful. That peer-to-peer approach is very, very valuable. I think when you're looking at choosing what to actually work on, there are tools that can help you prioritize, and I think you're going to cover some of that in a minute, Michele, but I think it has to be relevant and it has to be meaningful to your whole team. And your team includes your patient population. So I would bear that in mind, because the more relevant it is, and the more it's going to ease your day and improve your patient's outcomes, the more likely you're going to get engagement, which is one of the tricky things. And the perception that change is hard is out there. The perception that data is either not relevant or it doesn't apply to me. We know that there are normal reactions to data, and that is good, but you have to be able to counter that by saying that even if the data is not perfect, you can learn something from it. It's nice that we've got HQCA because we've got those comparator reports, but the most common thing that I hear is, well, the HQCA data is old. But you know what, it gives you that year by year approach as well, and it will probably become more current as we go along. So I think there's multiple factors as we go through these steps. I think your point about small, brief interventions is the way to go, because it builds confidence within the team that you're picking an outcome or a goal that you can actually achieve, and then you can celebrate and gain confidence in your whole process. And whilst you're doing it, what you're going to actually do is improve your QI process as you're doing the improvement. So you're going to get, you know, better at it, and it's going to become embedded, so that even when the wheels come off, I just had to change clinic, I had to change EMR. It's been a huge state of flux. I've had about 9 MOAs in the last year. And yet the QI process, now that we're kind of settling again, it's kind of embedded now. So I've managed to get the team enthused that, you know what, if we're going to get this right, we've got a good opportunity now to start things off well. So I think this is something that we can all do, and we are going to have to do it. So we're already doing it with our patients every single time we look at a lab results. So we're just transferring it now to our clinic processes and improving outcomes.
That's a fascinating point. You're right. This is not new work. It's just looking at it in a different way. And also, I like how you reiterated that we need to let go of perfection with this. We're not doing research where improvement work doesn't require that degree of perfection in how we approach it. Erin, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to what you just added. And I think you both touched on that QI is different than research. And I think a lot of physicians, especially those more engaged leaders, have been involved in research projects in the past. And so have this idea that it's going to be this big, lengthy undertaking. And so this can be another area where reaching out to your practice facilitators can be helpful, because practice facilitators can help you scope that work, break it down into those digestible pieces, help rein you in, and then help keep you accountable and checking in on those PDSA cycles, or take down notes for you, or facilitate meetings, things like that. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, call your PF, call your PCN, because we can help you break that down into those digestible bites, so it can go faster and be more palatable.
Yeah, PFs are so valuable that honestly we can't talk highly about them enough. Really, it's such a great resource to have. All right, moving on. So once the changes have been tested and implemented, we need to focus on sustaining those gains. It's so sad to see how often teams make a change and then it just slides back. And I'm sure Erin would agree that staff members are often just kind of holding on while this project is happening, just waiting until they can go back to normal. And that's what this quote from IHI on the screen is getting at. A new process may improve the measures, but if it's not relatively easy, or if the frontline staff isn't aware of the benefits it has for patients, something that gives them that motivation to fully make the changeover, they're likely to let it slide once no one is really watching it. So it's important to always be checking in with the team. Is this process comfortable for you? Is it sustainable? Because sometimes people tend to be pleasers, and they're doing it because this is where we're doing for now, but I can't wait to go back. So make sure you check in and ensure that the process actually is easier for the people who are doing the work regularly. And Erin, anything to add to that one?
Yeah, I think you've definitely nailed it. And I would just plug in another pitch for the PFs in this area as well, because it's definitely something that they would have more time maybe than the leader of the project to come and sit and answer questions, or to set up little follow-up tools, or we have all kinds of different tracking systems you can use to engage teams. But I would also just repeat something that Tina had said, which is, as you're looking at sustainment, being open to that continuous improvement mindset, and recognizing that something that you maybe have changed today may not last forever, and you notice. So as long as you're also focusing on how you can communicate as a clinic, how do changes be brought forward, how can we catch those little things that aren't working anymore before they become a big issue. So just looking at those things from sustainment as well, not just for the specific project, but just in general, how you communicate as a team, and what type of open environment you've got for, as you said, continuous improvement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. And just a couple points on that, tips, because often when people are, quote unquote, underperforming, it's often because they're not really fully sure about what they're supposed to be doing or how to do it. So if there's a new process and they're not super clear on it, they're going to default back to what they do know, which is usually the old way of doing things. So it's really important to have clearly defined steps for how to do a new process, like in a process map. And clearly defined related roles and responsibilities are also really important. And it's also important to check back in with the team and make sure they're not having problems with the process. Maybe something has changed and it needs to be, just tweaked a little bit. And then finally, there's no need to measure frequently, but it is important to schedule the occasional check-in measure just to make sure that things are still on track. And then you can kind of nip things in the bud if they are starting to veer off. All right, so we're getting close to the end. We're on to spreading the successful changes. And this is an important aspect of QI work is, when you've done all this work to figure out a new way of doing things that works better, how great to be able to share it. So QI work is generally tested with one physician's patients. And then once the process is working well, once all the bugs are worked out, it gets spread to the other physicians in the clinic. And if it's working really well, it's great when there's a way to spread the process beyond the clinic walls, maybe to others in the PCN, or maybe even to others in the zone or even the province. So Tina, what can you share with us about spread and scale?
Yeah, I think it's something that we often overlook, actually. I think, celebrating the success, making sure that you recognize that you've moved forward, or, sometimes these things don't go as you expect, but you find out something else. You might go off on one tangent and then find that actually the key problem is how people are putting things into the EMR. So, rubbish in, rubbish out piece. But that's still a success because it moves you forward a step. I think it might be one clinician, it might be 2 or 3 if it's a large clinic who will do it, and then sharing it. Absolutely, it's going to be able to sustain and implement in the team if you've got buy-in from the broader group. Within PCNs, I think one excellent way is to be able to network with those who are using a similar EMR and might have ironed out some of those processes. How often have we gone through and tried to figure something out from scratch when actually there's another clinic that you just don't know about who might have done the same? And then when you're thinking more provincially, I guess I immediately come to groups like ours with the PLP and the CME CPD offices that are really helping to combine medical education and tools for practice together with groups coming together and working on specific areas of change and actually sharing from each other's successes and challenges, because that's how we're going to get a real embedding of this within our practice on a daily basis. So I think there's huge potential. I don't think we're there yet, but I think we just keep an open mind and keep plugging, and we will get the early majority and beyond for sure.
Yes, very wise. Great points. Which brings us to the final step. And in my mind, I think this is potentially one of the most important, because if we don't take a moment to celebrate the good work, people get tired. And so teams that celebrate not only reaching their aims and goals, but also celebrating the milestones along the way, experience less change fatigue. And so, it doesn't have to cost money. It doesn't have to be a big deal. It just takes maybe a little creativity to really celebrate with the team the good work. And Erin, anything to add as a PF around that?
Celebrating is one of my favorite things as a PF, is I get to be a bit of a cheerleader and just point out to teams all of the good work that they've done. So if you aren't sure what you've accomplished, reach out to your PF. They probably know how far you've come, and they have that 10,000-foot view to see where you've come from. But I totally agree. And even if it's just a simple milestone, like we finally got that person putting that data in the right field, or, we finally figured out how to get this query and we've included all of the things. Like any little success that you can achieve, you should celebrate, because you're right. There's just so much going on right now, and we can get way too buried under it all if we don't find those little joy snacks.
I like that, joy snacks. Tina, anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And I think what happens is you kind of start to forget the small changes that have been done once they're normalized. And that's when the fatigue comes in. It's like, okay, there's another thing we have to do. And I think it's flipping it around to say everything that we're choosing to do it because it's relevant, because we all believe in it in this team. This is important to us and it's important to our patients. It's going to make our lives easier. So we're ready for the next thing that we're going to do, rather than, oh my gosh, they're now telling me I've got to do this, this, and this. So I think, honestly, with the physicians, I think every single day with every patient that comes through the door, we're doing little QI cycles with them. And it can be tiring, but we help our patients celebrate their successes. We just need to transfer that to what we're doing and not make it, a paper exercise to put a tick in a box to get your accreditation. Actually make it meaningful.
Yeah, great points. Great points. All right. So this takes us through the full sequence, and now we'll look at just a couple of resources. There is a resource called the Sequence to Achieve Change workbook, and this kind of guides a team through all of those steps and has spaces for them to make notes and write things down. We'll send this out in the email that comes out after the session. And then even better than using the STAC workbook is to use it with a practice facilitator. Again, it's so helpful to have a guide in all of this work, and they're very familiar with using this this tool and really helping to guide a team along. And then I'm going to pass it to Tina to talk a bit about the MyPI tool.
Yeah, thanks, Michele. So at the University of Calgary, the CME and PD offices and the Physician Learning Programme have combined to recognise that with the change in accreditation standards, all physicians, not just primary care, are going to have to submit a statement to say that they have engaged in for the CPSA, a practice improvement cycle. And there are three parts to that, one of which is including data and reflection, one is personal development, and one is related to your CANMED roles as a professional. We immediately felt that there was a gap in the ease with which this is done for the individual clinician. It's quite an onerous process to transfer information into some of the templates that are out there, and then the whole accreditation piece and actually submitting can be challenging. So this tool is an online tool. It's to support either an individual clinician or a team to go through a practice improvement cycle. You can allow other team members, like your practice facilitator, access to this so that they can use it with you and help prompt you along the way. One of the key things is it charts your progress. You pick up where you left off. It goes through pretty much every single step that we've been talking about this morning with some useful tools. But the key at the end is that it's a direct credit entry. So you immediately go and get your main pro and that accreditation statement for the college, which we don't have to actually submit anywhere at the moment. But if you are audited, you would have to have proof that you had gone through these steps. So we've just tried to make it a little bit more streamlined and easy. We've had a great beta testing of it and are doing final tweaks, but it is available right now. Anybody wants to use it, they can use that QR code and get in touch with us. And we're looking for feedback, and we really want to make this sustainable going forward with our partners, because we think it will be very helpful both for the practice facilitators and clinic managers, as well as our physicians. And always the aim is to improve outcomes for our patients.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Tina. And for those of you who weren't maybe able to attend the PF Network session that the champion group here was invited to in December, Dr. Danielle Michaels from the CPSA did a session on the Physician Practice Improvement Program. So we'll send out that recording again, also if you'd like to watch it but haven't had a chance, and then again, all of this can come together so you can use perhaps MyPI or work with your practice facilitator to meet the requirements of the PPIP.